How much is that?
All right, we are live. Welcome to the Podcast Editors Mastermind, almost on time edition. I think this has never happened before. So for those of you that have joined us live and are wondering why we're already live, that's it. We happen to start on time. So yeah, we're glad to be here. If you're joining us live, we'd love to see your comments and have your questions and all that kind of stuff in the chat so that you can help be part of this conversation, because we want to make sure that it's valuable for you. Today, we're going to be talking with Jesse McCune about his first podcast editing client. But before we get into that, we're going to do some quick introductions. I'm Brian Etzminger. You can find me at podcasteditorsmastermind.com or my own website, toptieraudio.com. And above me is
Jennifer Longworth of bourbonbarrelpodcasting.com.
And today's guest is Jesse McCune. I already dropped his name. He's been on the show before, back in episode 78. He's got a background in music production and audio engineering. And now he's a podcast editor, and he's joining us to talk about his first experience or his first client as a podcast editor. So, Jesse, welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, yeah. Great to have you. This is always so fun, right? We've got to figure out where to start. And I always like starting a little bit at the before part, as far as like what you were doing before you started editing for clients, some kind of stuff like that. I know that you were doing some audio production, but why don't you share with us a little bit about what life looked like, what you were doing before you started editing podcasts?
Music has been a big part of my life forever. So I've always been, since, 2000, 2001, I've been involved in teaching myself music production and audio engineering. But that was never anything beyond just kind of a hobby. I met my wife, and she can actually make music and puts my engineering skills to use. I'm not the greatest musician, but my life before podcast editing was really, I did a lot of work in facility maintenance.
Oh.
I worked as a mechanic in bowling centers. So a lot of that kind of work. So nothing at all related to podcast editing other than having the love of music.
Nice. So I have to pause here and just ask an totally off the trail question. My wife and I went bowling last week, and I am almost certain that I saw I didn't see pins getting knocked down and then running back up and being dropped. It looked like they were being pulled back up on strings. Like, have I been wrong my entire life that the pins are just attached and they just get sucked back up into the machine?
No, that's either like duck pin bowling uses strings. I've been out of bowling for about 10 years, so maybe there's a new machine that uses those. I know there was one that didn't get built up around too much, but it used magnetics somehow to do the same thing. But usually, no, it's all done mechanically.
Okay. I'll get us back on track. I didn't know that part about your background. One of the fun things is really finding out about the background, right? So you were doing maintenance type stuff, right? And then the audio engineering, was that professional? Was that part-time professional? Was it just a hobby? What was that?
It's always been just a hobby.
Really?
Yep.
Knowing where you are now, I would not have guessed that. I would have guessed that it was at least a side business all that time. It's incredible what you're able to do. So that's very, very cool. What was it that kind of started moving you toward podcast production? Like, what moved you there?
My wife, Tara. We were in the middle of COVID. I was on furlough. We'd always talked about starting a business together, but we never had the time, and we never could find quite the right ways we could work together. Primarily, she's the creative. She has all of the skills. We were struggling with how I could bring something other than like business type stuff. And one day she's like, have you thought about podcast editing? And it's like, okay, I'll go look into that because I love audio. And if this is a way I could start making some money from my audio experience, that would be perfect.
Yeah, because you already got the skills.
Yeah.
Right?
I thought so.
Oh, you thought so? What did you not know?
Music and dialogue are two completely different things. We might use the same tools, but the approaches are completely different. The way you try to compress and EQ a vocal in a song is a lot different than dialogue that's by itself. You're not having to fight with guitars and drums to be heard and to be clear. So the approaches are completely different. So learning the nuances of speech, picking up on that so you know, okay, this is why this edit doesn't sound right, even though it's clean.
I think one of the biggest things for me to learn, aside from the audio engineering parts, which was a huge learning curve for me, right? The EQ, the compression, like all of that stuff. But a big part of the actual editing part that I struggled with for a while was the pacing. How do you approach the pacing when you're doing something?
You just have to learn how to listen to how people talk, not hear how they talk, but actually listen to them, because your brain will pick up on those subtle nuances. If we cut out too many breaths, our brains don't have that time to process. We start to realize those breaths are missing. When the pacing is off, if we have too short of a pause after a certain word, like a word that ends with an exhale and the next word is an inhale, if we don't have the right timing there, our brains do pick up on that. Our brains are really good at doing a lot of things we're never even aware of, but we hear people talk all the time. So when something doesn't fit in with that normal pattern, our brains go, hey, something's different.
So you were on furlough during COVID. Your wife said, hey, what have you thought about podcast editing? I think is what you said. How did that transition work? What did that look like for you to start getting into it?
Just diving in, trying to learn everything I could about it, and then finding out there's a huge lack of information for anybody that has experience with audio. All of the podcast stuff seems to be really basic in nature or aimed at podcasters who want to do it themselves versus people who are going into this and wanting to do the job on par with an audio engineer. So I just found all of the stuff out there was kind of lacking. There were some decent courses, which, I mean, the good ones all seem to be about RX. I know Carrie has one that was good. Don Barnes had one that was good, but I couldn't find anything that really went into detail, the kinds of details I was looking for when it came to podcast editing.
I would agree with that. I think most of the courses that I've seen, other than Chris Curran's podcast engineering school, which was quite an investment, they focus on like the 5 easy steps to launch your podcast. And it's like, hit record, edit, publish, done, right? And it's like, okay, yes, those are all the things that have to get done. But somebody to actually teach you how to do it, has been, and I think is still in general a lack in the space. It's getting better. And I know that you're working on that some, right, Jesse?
Yeah. To kind of follow up with what you were saying, I did end up going to Chris Curran's podcast engineering school. Okay. It is quite the investment, but I feel it's really overkill for the average podcast editor. A lot of editors don't want to get too into the engineering side of things and being able to run recording sessions. They just want to learn the editing side of things. And going through that, seeing the cost with that, seeing what's out there in terms of other courses. There's a few people like Chris Curran, Tom Kelly, who are putting out good quality content, but there's a lot of stuff that just isn't that good. And that was a big reason why I started thinking about doing my own course, which morphed into Tansy Astor Academy,
which I happened to put in the lower thirds because I was on top of it for a change.
Woohoo! So what is Tansy Astor Academy?
It's basically it started out as a course to teach how to level up your podcast editing, but it's morphed into a community because I felt standalone courses don't give that one-on-one interactive feel that you need when you're trying to learn something. How do I do this? Or I can't figure out why I can't make RX clean this up. So having somebody there that you can go and ask questions to, you can post your audio to for feedback. Basically, it's a mentorship that I'm offering to people. They come to me with whatever problems they have. I'll create videos. Hey, this is how I solve this problem. using the audio they provide. So it's not like, here, this is how I do it. Go figure it out on your own. Go practice.
So this is definitely not a linear interview. We're kind of all over the place because we've kind of jumped forward to where you are right now. Going back to that transition, you were in the middle of furlough during COVID, so no work for you. Your wife says, hey, we should probably think about being a podcast editor. You started learning how to do that. What's that first client story for you?
How much time do you have?
We have approximately 45 minutes remaining. We don't have to spend all of it on this, though.
Okay, I'll see if I can keep it short.
Make it what it needs to be. We've got an editor. He's pretty good.
Basically, my first client was a perfect client. Didn't have to do anything to find her. She paid well, paid on time. We didn't spend a lot of time on email communications. Couldn't complain one bit. And the reason I said I didn't have to do anything to find her, she's my sister.
Gotcha.
Nice. I like it.
So in that regards, she was the absolute worst first client because I learned absolutely nothing working with her other than honing in my audio skills from experience.
So as far as like customer relationships and client relationships and stuff, none of that was...
Nothing. Everything was as smooth as possible.
I like that client story. I mean, it's good, right? Because we've heard from several people that their first client was the nightmare client, what they're calling the beta client. It was a bad fit. They were ill-equipped to manage the biz, like all of those kinds of things that you said really well for you. Those were not the case for a lot of the people that we've talked to. Not everybody. Some people have stellar experiences like you did. We don't want to presuppose. What was the second client like? Was that another one of the same?
No, that was my nightmare client.
Ooh, let's talk about that.
I found her. Chris Curran in his Slack group had posted, hey, I talked to someone who's looking for an editor. This is what the pay is. Let me know if you're interested and I'll send your contact information over. I ended up getting the job. It was a lot less than I was wanting to get. But at the time, it's like, my only client is my sister. I need to try and get another client.
Mm-hmm.
So I took this on. It was for a launch, for the first 4 edits, and a website. The website, we got knocked out. Everything was perfect. Everything went smoothly. The launch started out good. We got everything done until she just announced, yeah, we're launching next week. And this was about 3 weeks before we had talked about. Nothing had been done in terms of uploading to Apple and all of the different platforms. And this was also during Christmas, New Year's week.
Yeah, when you're not supposed to launch a show.
Yeah. So that was kind of the start of things. But we had talked about having the first 4 episodes done before we launch. We were still trying to finalize the first episode. And as each episode, I was spending about 8 to 10 hours combined between the edits, the revisions, the emails. There were so many emails. It was about 8 to 10 hours per episode for those first 4 episodes. And she kept saying, well, it'll get better. This is just the normal process when starting up a new show. That didn't seem quite right to me, but my only experience was working with my sister where everything was smooth sailing. So that kind of started, all of these things started adding up. After we'd done the second episode, I had scheduled a call with her to kind of go over things saying, hey, I'm still spending a lot more time than we agreed upon. Your episodes are longer than you told me and that we had spec'd out in the scope. We need to find ways to work more efficiently or we're going to have to revisit the price. It was a good meeting. Nobody was mad or upset. We left it as, let's try the next 2 episodes to try to streamline things. Those episodes went by. There was still no improvements there. So I told her, I don't think I'm the right editor for you. I'll stick around until you can find another one. And that's kind of where we ended. I think we ended up doing 6 episodes. She did end up paying me for all of the extra time that I spent on the first 6 episodes, which I didn't expect her to do. But that was a really big thing and a very professional thing.
Wow.
So we just weren't the right match. She needed someone who was able to work more cheaply and someone who was going to do everything she asked. One of the other things that was a deal breaker for me was coming to me, hey, I need you to grab this clip off of YouTube, go to this Netflix documentary. I need you to pull this part from it. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. If you want to provide me these clips, I will. But to me, that's kind of copyright infringement. And that's an area I don't go into. And it's clear in our agreement that we work with client supplied audio only. We're not sourcing it. We're not ripping it from anywhere. If that's what you want, that's fine. But we're not going to do that.
That's really good. I've had to push back a couple of times with similar stuff. I had one client that wanted to pull a segment off of a TV show because it was relevant to the guest. And I'm like, do you have permission to do this? Like, I don't want to get up all in your business, but I cannot afford a lawsuit from Disney or whoever produced the show. It wasn't Disney, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
I'm out of business. Like, I'm not going to be party to this. I'm sorry. I'd love to do this, but no. Have you seen that come up before? Or again, rather?
No, I haven't. And I think she comes from a place where, I guess, documentary work, it's commonplace to do that, she says. I don't know. I should actually ask my sister because that's the world she lives in. But I don't think you can just grab clips from a documentary or YouTube and use it and call it fair use in a documentary.
I mean, I don't know. If you're watching this and you want to know, I would say contact a lawyer, right? Get yourself an entertainment lawyer, not a real estate lawyer. Get a lawyer that knows IP and talk to them, right?
And don't go to Facebook asking people.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
Can I do this? Can I use 3 seconds of my favorite song in my podcast? We're not here to give legal advice. My whole thing is you give me the audio and I'll put it into place. My agreement covers me in that regard because you supply it. You're the one responsible for obtaining any rights necessary.
Yeah. And I would say that as long as you're ignorant of the fact that they didn't obtain rights, you may be okay if it wasn't legal. But if you know for sure, for those watching, contact an attorney. Because I don't know, if I have something written in my contract, but I know that the way you got it is illegal and I go ahead and use it, I don't know. That's an uncomfortable place for me. I guess everybody's got to walk it themselves for sure. And not an attorney. That's why I say talk to one, right?
But it was a real good way to get out of a bad client who had bad audio and wanted to use copyrighted material in every single episode. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. Thank heavens I don't work for you anymore.
Yeah. And ironically enough, since she had talked to at least a few of us in Chris's group, the next person that she ended up working with was also in his group. And Chris Curran would do, I don't know, monthly, quarterly check-in calls. And every time this guy was on there complaining about his problem client. And I knew exactly who this was. And it's like, I'm sorry, this is your mess, but I'm just so happy this is not my mess.
Yep. My next question is, so number 1 was easy breezy. Number 2 was terrible. Where did you find number 3 and how'd that go?
Number 3 came from the same place. It came from Chris Curran. And honestly, I've gotten far more out of that course in terms of business than I actually got in terms of knowledge, because so much of it was refresher stuff for me since I'd been doing audio engineering and kind of teaching myself that over the course of 20 years. But that has been the biggest part of that investment was the clients I got out of it.
Wow.
The next client paid significantly more than the last client. but came with its own unique situations. I was able to be more patient because more money buys you a little more patience, but it started out kind of bumpy because they had unrealistic expectations. They had switched from a different host and editor to a new host and a new editor. And they felt that since the audio wasn't as good, that was the editor's fault. And I had to have a frank conversation with them, kind of explaining to them, I can't work with somebody using a laptop mic and make them sound like the previous person who was recording with high quality equipment in a professional studio.
Right.
And they were okay with that. I said, here's some list of equipment, some different USB mics, headphones, get your hosts set up with this, and then let's talk if you're not happy with the audio. We ended up squashing that conversation when they did that. But that client, we ended up working together for about 2 years. And basically, we lost the client over politics. The person who had been overseeing the podcast, he kind of ruffled feathers. And since we were the ones working with him on the podcast, we were looked at as his people. So when they ended up letting him go, they kept us on until they found somebody else and then let us go. And this company that was really big on audio quality, all of a sudden their audio quality dropped off a cliff.
Oh.
Really?
Really. So I don't know if the person who was most behind the audio quality concerns when I first started, if that was the person who'd just been let go, or if they just felt we can't justify spending this much, so we're going to cut costs. And that's our number one priority. I'm not really sure.
So it was the showrunner that you're saying their interest in the audio quality went down, not the production company that came in behind you. I was interpreting that as the company that took over had a great reputation. All of a sudden the audio stunk. But I think what I'm hearing is the company that's producing the show, actually running the show, brought in another editor that for whatever reason, the audio that they produced wasn't the level of what you were producing.
I'm sure there's a difference there in your head.
Okay.
What I'm hearing isn't much different. Let me clarify.
Okay.
So none of this was done with agencies. We were working with the executive producer who was an employee of the company responsible for the show. It was a branded podcast. So when he was let go, we were let go. Whoever they put in charge of the show after him hired his people, and his people couldn't, not sure how to say this nicely. The audio just wasn't as good.
They didn't deliver the same spec.
No. I mean, you could hear edits. The volume was really low. You'd hear compression kicking in and out. It was a mess.
I actually was having a conversation with a prospective client a couple of days ago who was saying, he took a look at my rates. He's like, those aren't unreasonable, but they're a bit high for what I can afford right now. I'm like, I get it. He said, what about Descript? I had to preface it with, okay, here's the deal. I understand that I've got a dog in the show here. So I'm going to try and be as unbiased as I can, but these are the things that I've seen. And it ends up being things like what you're talking about, right? Unclean edits, cuts in the middle of words or in the middle of breaths, like all of that kind of stuff. Do you think that they were just switched over to something like that, or?
No.
Oh, wow.
The person who, since we'd worked with the showrunner for a month or two as the transition, he came from a film background. So I can't see him hiring someone that's going to just use the script.
Gotcha.
But having worked with a number of people, film people, they don't understand audio. They're visual. So they don't always tend to notice bad cuts or understand how the audio side of things works. I mean, the executive producer that took over, we were working on one episode where we'd already spent about 8 hours on cleaning up the speech of this person. There were a lot of verbal or vocal tics that required a lot of time to clean up to the level they wanted. And apparently they were done paying for more. So he decided he would go in and do it. He's editing the rendered MP3, and you hear all of these cuts. You hear stuff where it just goes to complete black in between things. And then I'm going to only assume that they re-rendered this MP3 before uploading it. So I'm sure there are film people out there that understand audio very well. But in most of my experience, I guess more along the lines of Tara's experience working with those types of people, they're nitpicky about the visuals and the color and all of that stuff. But with the audio, they don't really care.
We should probably hit a couple of comments. We missed one from Facebook user. Not quite sure who this is, but their comment is get documentation. Their word is not enough. I'm assuming that's related to using copyrighted material. I think that's probably good advice. I have it written in my contract that I expect the clients to keep that documentation rather than relying on me to do that. But consult an attorney as far as your strategy. I can't think of a reason you would be wrong to get documentation, but yeah, I think that's a good strategy. Jennifer, anything from you?
Well, I'm glad I asked that next question. I'm not going to keep going down the roster of every single client you ever had, but I think there was some good stuff. I want to go back to your academy. You were getting into podcast editing. You're like, there's nothing really out here for this. Did you start putting together courses at that point, or did you wait until you had a few under your belt?
I waited. I'd probably been doing it about 2 years before I started putting together a course. Because one of the biggest things is the longer you've been doing something, you forget about what it's like to start out. You forget about all the bumps and bruises you get as you learn. So there's no better time to really teach than when that stuff is fresh in your memory. And the other part of Tansy Astor Academy is there's a business part. So there's different tiers. We've got the podcast editing school, and then we have the pro group, which includes the podcast editing school, but it goes up a notch and focuses on the business side of things. Because what I've learned from those types of clients is I needed to learn how to be more confident. With the second client, I didn't feel confident speaking up. She had bought an SM7B. She had a Focusrite 2i2 and a DBX 286S. I helped her set it up, but I didn't really feel confident enough to tell her, look, let's just skip the 286. It's not going to really, I'll be doing whatever it's doing better. So let's just leave that out of the equation. I didn't have the confidence or the experience to really feel like that was my place to say. So as we start recording, I'd asked her to give me a sample clip before we record the first episode. She recorded the first episode, the entire thing, and I find out she had turned the de-esser on. I had told her, no, not the de-esser, the gate. I told her, leave the gate off, leave the de-esser off, leave the compressor off. She turned on the gate, and the whole episode, you could hear it cutting off the beginnings and ends of words. So she went and redid the whole thing. And it's like, look, this wasn't my fault. I asked you to record a 2-minute clip so I could analyze the audio. But yeah, learning to be more confident was one of the big things I learned. Another thing was the need to set better boundaries, making sure people understand what my business hours are. I'm not on call 24 hours a day. If you email me, I try to respond within a couple of hours. If you don't hear from me within one business day, reach back out. I realized I needed to learn how to better manage or handle difficult situations or conversations. I needed to learn how to better navigate discovery calls. I mean, that was one of the big ones. For the first, 2 dozen calls we got on, we'd get on the call. And I say we because a lot of times we were talking to people about things other than podcast editing. And it just felt like they were the person we were talking to was controlling the call. So they were asking us questions and we needed to find a better way of coming in and saying, this is our discovery call. Let's talk about what you need. And we'll get to your questions afterwards. And overall, just how to better communicate, because email communication can be difficult. Email communication is the worst when there's any kind of frustration or problem at hand, because people start reading emotions and reading into what's written, and they write something based on that. You start reading it, read it with your own interpretations, and it can turn something that's not that big of a deal into this really explosive situation. So communication was a big thing. And I kind of took all of that, and that's why we formed the pro group in Tansy Astor Academy. I have Tara, who has all kinds of marketing and creative background. My sister has a lot in the business ops side of things. She works with TV shows, rocket launches. I mean, she does the whole gamut of video work. So we figured between the three of us, we can really discuss the business side of podcast editing in a way nobody else really can. We bring experience from outside of podcast editing. And I think there's something to that, because a lot of us seem to run our business like side hustles. And I think that's a big thing that keeps people from turning that side hustle into actual self-employment.
Oh, that's good. I'm actually checking out your pricing right now, because part of the reason we host this group is we want everybody to learn, and we don't have it all figured out either, right? I'm still in side hustle world. And actually, so is Jennifer. You were full-time for a while though, right?
I tried to be full-time for a while, but then COVID and stuff.
Yeah. Actually, I wanted to maybe pause there for a second, because you said that that client was recording with the gate on and basically all the things that you told her not to do. I think you said her. I hope I didn't get the gender wrong. But anyway, I wonder if part of the reason is because there are so many voices telling everybody this is the way you have to do it. And they're all saying something different. And so it becomes hard to trust the person that you're paying, because there's this other person that you're listening to that says, do it this way. Did you ever have any conversations around why this person felt like they needed to use all of those different pieces?
I can't remember if that came up or not. The general memory I have of it is that it just felt like she'd gone to the internet and did a Google search. What equipment do I need for a podcast? When I see a 2i2, a DBX, and a 7B, that's what I think. Just like you see people saying, the Yeti is the greatest mic ever. People recommend it because it was the first USB mic to hit the market 15 years ago. It was the only option back then. So it built a following in the early days that still follows it today, even though it's definitely not the best option for 99% of podcasters.
Yeah. And I actually had an experience similar to that when I launched my first show. There was a podcaster that I'd been listening to for a while that launched a free how to start a podcast show, or course rather. And it was good. He had spoken at Podcast Movement. I'm sure we didn't get everything right, but it had a good framework, a good set of things to go through. And the only piece of advice I didn't follow was he recommended, I think it was the ATR 2100. And I looked at the price of that, and some other podcaster had recommended these Logitech headsets as a great option. I was like, well, I can get two of those for the price of this. So if I need two, I've got two. So I went with that. Worst decision I made in launching my show was deviating from the advice that one person said. So usually what I say, like if somebody says one piece of advice would you give a first-time podcaster, I say, find one person that you trust to help guide you through the conversation or through the process, and don't ask everybody else. Just do what they said. You probably won't get everything exactly the way you want it, but once you get going and you know what you're doing, that's the time that you can start making changes. I think that continues to be a big gap in the space, because it's been largely a do-it-yourself, figure it out yourself kind of industry, if you will, for a long time. And I think that's how you end up with people that are still following advice given by the podcast answer man 20 years ago when the best option was a mixer and a portable recorder, right? That's why that advice existed, because there weren't other options at the time. Now there are remarkably better options.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. And a lot of it comes down to if you go online and ask people,
oh, yes.
Most of the people responding will just respond with the one thing they have experience with.
Mm-hmm.
How can you recommend a good mic if your only experience is with the one? I just went through 2 weeks of trying every mic I could get my hands on. Brian commented on the new mic. It's an Earthworks Ethos. I have a 2100X that we use when we send stuff out to Podfly clients. So I have that to demonstrate. I have a Q9U. My sister had a Heil PR30. My wife has the MV7. So I tried all of these. And there's more of a difference than I realized, even listening to like Podcastage mic reviews where he tests out a bunch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't hear as much difference on his voice as I do on mine. Is that because of the particularities of my voice, or because I'm more familiar with listening to it, having done a course and all of the content I've been creating over the last year? I don't know. But I realized the Q9U, which sounded to me very similar to the MV7 on other videos, there's a world of difference there. If they're at the same price, like I think the Q9U last time I looked was back up to $199, spend the extra $50 for the MV7. If it's on sale for $99, yeah, it sounds better than the 2100 and the Q2U, so that might be worth it. But how can you recommend any of them if you don't have experience? I just went through troubleshooting my whole recording chain, trying to figure out why I was getting so much noise. Ends up, I'm using a high gain mic with a really quiet voice, so I needed to add more gain to that. So I ended up buying a preamp that delivers 70 dB of clean gain. I also changed the mic to help reduce the amount of gain needed. And the audio to me is sounding much cleaner. I'm much happier with it. But going through all of this has helped me get a much better understanding of different recording flows, how each element can play into the overall recording quality. So anything you can do to get more experience, try different things when you have the opportunity to, borrow stuff from people you know, just to get some of that hands-on experience, because that is one thing AI can't replace, is our ability to talk to a client or somebody online and give them really good advice on, hey, here's my budget. What do you recommend I get for that? Because anybody can turn to Google and look it up.
Yeah, and I think that's really the difference between problem solving and finding the best solution for somebody versus an I just need to get started solution. If somebody just wants to get started and they want to know a microphone, the knee-jerk reaction is one of the three, right? The ATR 2100, the Q2U, the AT 2005, MV7, any of those, as long as they're in your price bracket, are fine. If you're saying, hey, I want to be able to do this and this is my budget, that's a whole different ballgame. And that really is someplace where we can differentiate ourselves through research or through practice and experience. Over my history, I've definitely bought too many microphones as well. And one of the things I've discovered is a lot of times you can get really close to the results you're looking for a little bit less money if you know what you're doing. So I like the microphone that I'm using. I'm kind of jealous of the microphone that Jesse's got right now. But I also know that this microphone is, $250, something like that. I know that I can get the same results out of a different $100 microphone, or I'll get 95% of the way there if I want to. It's just a different microphone and it's all in how you use it. Those are the kinds of things that you can bring to the table as an expert and go, you don't have the budget for this. Okay, this can get you most of the way there. Or, I think this will work well with your voice, because it's not just the microphone. It's also the voice and the use and the space. If you didn't have all those acoustic treatments on the back of your wall, what would it sound like, Jesse?
It would sound terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, you walk into the room, you can hear the difference. It's kind of weird.
Yeah. I had the same experience after I treated my room. Again, mine's not as pretty as yours, but I've got probably 2/3 of the walls are covered by some kind of acoustic treatment. And the next thing I need to do is probably the ceiling, or at least a portion of the ceiling, because I've got hardwood floors in the house and it's a box, right? It's a terrible recording space. So you just make it good by treating it. And I think those, again, are places where we have the experience to go, yeah, you probably need to do this. Do you offer that as consulting?
I do. And again, it goes back to, I want to work with higher priced clients. To do that, I need to be able to offer more than a typical editor who can just edit audio. It comes with being able to help them identify how they can improve their audio, not just, okay, let's change mics. Because really, like you were saying, changing the mic, I'm still going to sound like me regardless of which mic I use. Brian, you're going to sound like you. Jennifer's going to sound like Jennifer.
Yeah.
Mics aren't going to give you that radio voice. It's not going to change it. There will be small differences, but let's look at what would make a bigger difference in the audio quality, because the mic probably isn't it unless we've looked at everything else. And that's where the value we can provide can justify our higher costs.
And I think also this is where we can start to offer some perspective, if I could say that, right? So the difference between a $50 mic and a $250 mic is going to be probably pretty noticeable, depending on what you're using. Or the difference between a dynamic and a condenser, for example, will be pretty noticeable. The difference between a $200 mic and a $10,000 mic will be a lot more subtle, right? Because you get to a certain level. And yes, we would notice it, but it's not going to be the difference between Barry White and Barry Manilow.
With podcasting, no.
Right.
In the music world, there's going to be a huge difference between those. But that's a much different use case. Spending anything more than, really, let's say anything more than $300 on a mic, you're just buying it more for the look than anything else. I'm sure most people wouldn't be able to tell you the difference listening to somebody on an SM7B or somebody on a Q2U. The average listener won't notice. They're not going to care. And they're definitely not going to care enough that they're going to stop listening because you're using a Q2U. Unless you're using the Q2U 5 feet away from you in an echoey room. But an SM7B would sound very similar in the same situation.
One more comment from Patrick. The only echo he has left is what bounces back from his computer screen, and he puts acoustic panels under the screen, which helps. That's actually something that I haven't done yet. Do either of you have experience putting acoustic treatment in front of your screen?
Or around my screen? No, I don't think so.
Honestly, part of the whole process I've gone through the last 2 or 3 weeks was trying to find the source of this resonance. I was thinking maybe it's the window right in front of me. Maybe it's my computer screens. It ended up being a combination of, because I'm using so much gain, I'm having to boost up stuff in post. I'm having to use noise reduction. I started using a new EQ, which cuts down when I lowered the mids. Since I have so many mids in my voice, it started to unmask this resonance that I hadn't heard before. So I have spent a long time recording, taking this out of the chain, this, found out it was none of that. It was just something that the mids in my voice were masking. So I haven't noticed anything specifically from my screen. Patrick, you're doing better than me. I still have a wicked resonance in the 400 and another one in the 700 range. Maybe that's coming from the monitor. I haven't gotten that far yet.
Yeah, there's no follow-up for that. I mean, you've gone way more science on that than I did. So I love that. Poddex question of the day, pick a number between 1 and 5 because that's how we roll.
See, I was going to say 7, so let's do it 4.
1, 2, 3, 4. We've had this one before. Hopefully not on the episode you were on. What's your guilty pleasure? And I will modify this to be, what's your guilty pleasure in podcasting? Because I don't want to know what TV shows you're watching on Netflix right now. Mine would absolutely be fawning over different microphones and interfaces. Even if I never intend to buy them, I just love researching them and watching videos about them. And yeah, I'm doing the right thing. I love that stuff, but also it is definitely a guilty pleasure. Who's next?
Maybe my guilty pleasure is I don't really listen to podcasts.
Nice.
There you go.
Because like I said, I'm a music lover. If I have time I can listen to something, it's going to be music.
Mm.
Well, if I am listening to something that I'm not getting paid to listen to, it's probably the Murder Police podcast. And I wouldn't consider myself like a true crime junkie or whatever, but these folks are from here in Central Kentucky, and the murders they talk about are from Central Kentucky, and they're talking to the people who work the cases. And then I'm like, now I'm interested. The Murder Police.
Nice. Murder Police. Jesse, we've talked a little bit about now it's me, Tansy Aster Academy. People find you at Tansy Aster Audio, is that right, as well?
Yeah, that's my editing side of Tansy Aster. We have a whole Tansy Aster umbrella. Tansy Aster Creative is Tara's side of things. We've got audio for the editing, and Tansy Aster Academy is where we teach.
If somebody wants to be a guest, Jennifer, how do they do that?
They got to go to the website at podcasteditorsmastermind.com and click Be a Guest.
Nice. So with that, I think we're just going to go ahead and wrap it up. We started on time. We ended early. I don't know what happened. Normally
I'll take credit for that.
Yeah, everybody was on time today. I don't know how that happened, but we love it. As we wrap up, I'm Brian Ensminger. You can find me at toptieraudio.com, and above me is
Jennifer Longworth. You can find me at bourbonbarrelpodcasting.com.
I'm Jesse McCune. You can find me at Tansy Aster Audio and Academy.
And unable to join us tonight, we're Carrie Caulfield, who you can find at carrie.land. That's Carrieland. It's a scary place, but she's a fun person. And also Daniel Abendroth, who is at rothmedia.audio. We hope to have them back at some point in the future because we love them. In the meantime, thanks, Jesse. Thanks, Jennifer. And we'll see you all in a couple of weeks. Maybe.
So how much is that?
So